mysterious Redditors who are no longer in contact with their parents. What was the final straw? Story 1. I slowly started having less and less contact with them when I went into foster care at 15. Final straw was long before that, but legally I couldn't block them out of my life until I turned 18, but I could wean myself off them bit by bit until that day. I think the final straw was probably the day I finally got out. She had called the police saying I threatened to kill my younger siblings. I had been locked in my room since I had come home from school and hadn't even spoken to anyone else. The cop that came that night gave me a choice on how I could finally leave that shitty abusive situation, and I took it. The final straw was when I walked downstairs with the cop, and she was tearfully saying how I shouldn't go, and how much she'd miss me, and on and on. After the years of horror she put me through, I was just done, and I knew as soon as I could I would be cutting her and her husband out of my life. Went no contact the day I turned 18, and haven't spoken to either for 7 years. One of the best decisions I have ever made. Story 2. One I can actually answer. My mom and dad split when I was 3. My mom couldn't get a job, kept getting evicted, so my dad took my sister and we moved back to my birthplace, Germany. 5 years later, we moved back to the States, and I re-met my mom, who had remarried and had another kid. Throughout my youth, my sister and I were in constant back and forth custody battles, my mom barely able to afford anything because she had still never had a job, and my now ex-stepdad, who I love and still talk to often, was working as a kitchen manager for a restaurant. They had another child, bringing the count to 4. My mom was a lazy, never-working mom who spent her days stuck to the phone until she learned about RuneScape, then subsequently World of Warcraft. By this time I was like 16 and living with my dad, so I chose not to go over often. She ended up moving into the basement, her bed right next to the computer, where she would wake up, play whatever games, then roll back into bedroll. Literally by this point, my brothers were like 6 and 10. They were in a private school poverty scholarship. And my stepdad had moved to working in the interior redesigning field, including like building walls, painting inside outside. Bunch of hard work. This is relevant because he would leave for work by 7 a.m. and get back by 7 p.m. He supervised, so when the kids weren't in school, they were free to run amok. My brothers had rotten teeth. One had a speech impediment from lack of being pushed to read in school, not a birth or LD. One day, I dropped by. I don't remember why, but I did. The kids were sitting in the living room in their school clothes, which were stained all over, holes in the pants, ECT. I asked the older of the two what was going on, and he said Mom is on strike. Mom is on strike. I went downstairs and felt like a parent, talking to a 12-year-old who wouldn't listen. I did 2 loads of laundry for the kids and left. I called my stepdad. He was crying because he was just so exhausted when he got home, and he felt like it wasn't even a home anymore. She had begun talking with these dudes online from her games and said she no longer loved my stepdad. This was also going on, and I hadn't known. My stepdad ended up finding a lady willing to rent him a house cheap if he would do work on it. That way, he was still paying bills for my mother and, of course, taking care of the boys. I'd gotten laid off by this point and needed a place to stay for a couple months. I went to my mom's, and I hadn't been there in a couple years. The house was wrecked, dog everywhere, dishes all over the place, ECT. It was basically at the point where it should have been condemned. I put my bed in the extra room, realized the first day that the AC was broken, and it was June. Not just that, there was a fly infestation. It was bad, very bad. I eventually moved out within like 2 months, and she was kicked out right after. They got an apartment, and I thought all was good now. Then she met a dude online who lived in D.C., we live in N.C. Eventually, like within a month, she dropped my brothers off at our great uncle's, not relative, but growing up calling him uncle, and left for D.C. Again, she had still not gotten a job at all. Since she was 22 now in her 40s, she left my brothers and bounced. Second time she has done this to children. My stepdad found out a week later and went and got the boys, except for my brother now, being a 420 friendly 19-year-old skate kid who has not gotten a job. They've done much better. He did graduate, which surprised me. I wasn't sure if it would ever happen. My younger of the 2 brothers is a junior in high school. Varsity wrestler, scholar, ECT, doing really well. She still lives with this guy. Still doesn't work. What makes me even more mad is how I would see her on my sibling statuses, saying things like, I raised you right, I am so proud of you kids, and things to that nature. And my first thought was, bitch, I raised me. She was very absentee. Even when I was a kid, eventually, she would try to make it a huge spectacle when she would come into town. No one cared except my youngest brother, but he was a mama's boy. 2 years ago, I bought them both phones for Christmas to replace the old shitty ones they had on the guy in DC's plan. I didn't cancel their lines. I paid full price so they could have them on their current service. She got pissed, threatened my brothers with stupid, said some to me, and I went off. I blew the up and told her I never wanted to hear from her shitty ever again. She tried to contact me to this day, but it's been over a year and I've stood my ground on resolve. She is not a mother. She never was and never will be. She is pathetic in the dirt beneath my shoes. Maybe she'll grow up one day and become a mom. But even then, I don't see resolve from my end. am sure I can go on and on about other reasons, or why it took me so many years to finally tell her enough is enough. But I did, and I feel great about it. P.S. Talked to my ex-stepdad this morning, who I still call Dad, and had a great Merry Christmas conversation. He taught me so much about being a man, and I am thankful for him every day for the lessons he taught me. Merry Christmas. Edit Holy X2 Gilded, my first gold. Thank you, kind people. Story 3. My parents divorced when I was 3. Until my teenage years, I had regular contact with my dad, but it was pretty clear that he prioritized his new family. His second wife was insanely jealous and hated me. That's kind of hard to understand as a kid, so I just came out of it with a huge inferiority complex. After I moved away from home, I had a bitterness and resentment phase and broke off contact with my dad. That lasted for 10 years until my son was born. My dad started sending birthday and Christmas gifts, and I thought, he should see his grandchild, so I invited him over to stay for a couple of days. He had divorced again and was single. Well, he arrived, and we had nothing to talk about. It was awkward. His luggage was a plastic bag full of wine bottles. When I got up the next morning, they were all empty. After he left, we just didn't talk again. It's been 17 years. From what I hear, he's now married for the 3rd time to a woman who shares his love for red wine. So I guess he's happy, probably based on my life experience. I think blood relationships are overrated. There's nothing special about sharing the same genes. Find your family among people who are there for you and appreciate you for who you are. Story 4. My mom died suddenly when I was 12, and my father immediately started pawning off my developmentally delayed brother myself on anyone he could. He eventually convinced a woman to marry him less than a year after our amazing mother had died very suddenly. New stepmother did not want kids, and made that clear from day one. I was kicked out at 15, 12, 16. I had to call CPS on my parents so I could finish high school, have a place to sleep. Finally, when I got kicked out at 17, I left for good, graduated while living in a 1-bedroom apt with 2 friends. A couple years after that, they gave my brother to a family ID never met. They're wonderful and love him, but it's still infuriating. I hate that selfish and that stupid. They can both go die in a fire for abandoning us that way. My first gold. Thank you, kind stranger. Story 5. I was always torn between my parents after the divorce. I was about 9 at the time, and it seemed like even after that they were always fighting and attacking each other. My emotional state was pretty shitty for a couple years after that. I eventually just kind of stopped talking to my dad. No particular reason, but he called on my birthday and stuff. By the time I turned 15, I was feeling much better about everything in my life and ended up saving my education because of it. There were a few things that happened in between graduation and Father's Day, but Father's Day was the last straw. He called me and asked if I wanted to come to his hometown for Father's Day, which I reluctantly agreed to because of what happened on graduation. Then he started to, completely unprovoked, bash my mom for at least 5 minutes straight. Everything negative emotion I had when I was little, every struggle I had with my parents, came back to life in those 5 minutes. And then I realized he caused literally all of them. He was manipulating me into believing my mom was the devil, and I almost bought into it. I hung up and haven't talked to him again since. It's been 4 years. Story 6. My parents are very much divorced and hate each other, mostly due to my father's rampant alcoholism. At 17, I joined the Army to be less of a burden on my mother, get some kind of future going, and served active time, joined the Guard, and went to college, and got swept up into the ball of fun that happened after 9/11 with a few deployments. When I came home for the last time, I decided to reach out to my father, drove to his house, thought we could have a decent conversation for once since it was early, and he couldn't possibly be intoxicated before 10 a.m. I was wrong. First words out of his mouth was, "So how many ragheads did you get to kill?" I just looked at the ground and realized it was futile. A few years later, I met the girl of my dreams and got engaged. When I invited him to the wedding, no RSVP. I called him and asked if he got the invitation. He said he did. I asked him if he was going to come with my grandmother, and he said he wasn't, which means grandma didn't have a ride. And when I asked why he wasn't coming, he told me because we're not that close. I asked him how he expected to get closer to his son if he didn't want to come to my wedding or meet his new daughter, and he hung up, and that was it. To be fair, my father is also a veteran and by all accounts got a little scrambled in Vietnam, but I told him when and if he decides to sober himself up, I will be ready to pick up the phone. My new fear is that we're gearing up to attempt to have a kid, and my grandfathers both played such a huge element in my life that I don't quite understand what a childhood would be without one. But I remember being a young kid and being driven around by this guy who was beyond intoxicated, being beaten in public for no reason, being taken fishing, which was fun in the morning, but got horrible after the drinking took effect. I fear that when, and if we have a kid, he will actively want to be in the kid's life, and the kid will be exposed to all the evils that I was exposed to. Story 7, I guess he left the state when I was 12. Next time I heard from him was my 21st birthday. It was a self-pitying missive about how much he missed me. I responded something to the tune of, "You owe me 100 grand in child support, and am not the one who changed my address and phone number in 2002. He shot back with more delusional self-pitying garbage. And now I try to ignore my annual birthday ruining message. Story 8, she left me when I was 3, started a new family without me. And that is why I don't and won't make contact with my parents. They both ditched me as a kid and left me to grow up in the system. I have no interest in having contact with them, even though for several years now, they have both separately tried to contact me. They are biologically my parents, but that is it. Story 9, I haven't spoken or seen my father in about 7 years. He was a horrible father who hit my mother throughout my whole life, and even before I was born, Ma'am sent him to prison twice for domestic violence. But she always went back to him as she thought it would be better to take care of me, with 2 parents in the picture. Final straw was when my dad went apeshit in front of me at my mom, and she fled the house with me and got a restraining order straight away. There's a lot more to the story, but I won't get into it too much. The coward fled the house with all the valuables before the cops showed up at the door to him out. I am so happy that he's gone, and I hope that for as long as I live, I never see that piece of. Story 10, I was 16, and I wouldn't lie in court about my mother, so he could get out of child support for me and my little brothers. So he kicked me out of the house at 2 a.m. in February. He tried to make it up to me later, and instead ended up shoving me against a wall. So hard I fell, and lost my breath. First thing out of his mouth, "You fell, be yourself. And my new wife will vouch for me if you try to tell anyone otherwise." Never looked back or talked to him again. Story 11, how fitting today was the last straw. Backstory. My parents were divorced when I was 17 years ago. My dad and mom got remarried. My mother's husband is nice, and my father's wife is a sociopath, obviously my own diagnosis, and probably not true. Stepmother had 2 children, both girls aged 6 and 12 when I met them. Older stepdaughter got pregnant 3 times by the time she was 18. Stepmother's behavior is as followed. Possessive. She always dropped subtle hints that she wanted to be my mother and was constantly hating, fighting, being rude to my girlfriends. If she couldn't get a hold of me, she would call my friends and say she was my mother and wanted to speak to me. Gets very angry when I would spend holidays with my real mother and would scream at me for not spending time with my dad's side of the family. Angry. She would get angry at least twice a week over stupid things, such as my room wasn't spotless. I left a full glass of water on the table. Sleeping in too long, 11 a.m. is too late, not getting dressed for the day. I had a glass of wine with dinner age 21 stating I needed to set a good example for her daughter. I would always get a talking to about drinking at family functions and even having a beer by myself. I smoked cigarettes sometimes. The number one thing she would get angry about is I was never home. I was never home because I was afraid of getting yelled at or talked to or accused of something. She would always accuse me of doing things. She claimed she smelled weed in the house, but I've never smoked. Other famous claims were that I was using her shampoo, which is weird. She also would yell at me for not getting everyone present for Christmas. I'm in college and working part-time. You're not getting a present. There's others, but can't remember them all right now. Her thing always was that I was never home for home-cooked family dinners. She would yell at my dad and stepsisters because I waste there. Want to know where I was most of the time? Studying? I was studying somewhere because I can't stand attention in the house. So I told them I'm not coming home. I'm studying. Leave me alone. She was so pissed and yelled so much my dad called me and said, "Can you please tell your stepmother you're sorry and come home or make time to see the family?" I saw the family 3 days out of the week, my mom's family 3 days out of the week, and my girlfriend 1 day out of the week. When I was about 15, I developed a case of anxiety and depression, feeling like she always controlled me. When I was 18, I had my first job that I worked full-time and went to school full-time. My grandmother came with a surprise visit for one night, gave us a 1-day notice, and it happened to fall on the day. I was busy at school and morning work at night. I said, "Sorry, I have obligations," and can't make it. My grandma was sad, but understood. My stepmother wasn't so happy. She brutally yelled and screamed and said every nasty thing about me, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. It was so intense and scary that I blacked out, fell face first on the ground. It was vasovagal syncope. She still made me apologize to her, and like a scared I did. This happened a few more times. 3 months ago this happened, and I told my dad I'm moving out and not dealing with that psycho anymore. I remain in contact with my dad until today. Things have been improving. I'm not anxious anymore or sad or scared and feel amazing. Yesterday, stepmother texted me saying, "Why haven't you contacted me and talked to me about this? And why I didn't get her a present?" Then she texted my girlfriend and tried to manipulate her into talking to me and made me look like an ungrateful. I asked my dad, "Are you seriously taking her side on this?" He said, "Your stepmother just is looking for a happy family like Leave It to Beaver and that her family won't be complete without me." I replied, "Do you not see how up that is? She's not my mother. I no longer wish to know you, father. Do not contact me unless she is out of your life permanently." I drove to his house today to give back the unwrapped present he gave me. I said, "I don't want this present." Thanks for listening, Reddit edit. Thank you for the kind words, Reddit. My major issue with all this was that I was convinced it was me who was being bad and that my stepmom and my dad were right until I started speaking to people on Reddit. I should have mentioned that it was Reddit that actually gave me the confidence and advice needed to leave. I do like to thank Anxiety, Remotivation, Meditation, AskReddit, Raise It by Narcissists, and Self-Improvement. Reddit may have just changed my life for the better. She died. That kind of ended that. My father left when I was 1, and no matter how abusive he was, I always forgave him. After my mom died, he got really bad, calling me just to tell me I'm worthless. It was in July 2011 when I called to say I had set up a bank account like he asked, so he could send child support to my stepfather who would take care of me. He called my stepfather pathetic for wanting another man's help. No one insults my stepdad. Sure as not when he is raising me as his own daughter. That was the moment it ended with my father. Story 12, my stepmother secretly and deliberately terrified me to the point where I was too scared to visit their house. My father pretended none of it had happened. Also, I later found out that I had a 13-year-old sister Head kept secret from me. Story 13, my mother is a complete narcissist. My brother ODD, and she turned his funeral into a fiasco. Invite tons of people who didn't know him or didn't like him. She changed the death date on the announcement so people wouldn't know what happened. The clincher for me, though, she got up to the podium and said that he wouldn't have been so depressed. He was a paranoid schizophrenic with early onset. If I, his sister, had been nicer to him. It's been over 3 years, and I finally don't feel angry or hurt anymore. Story 14, kicking me out of the house 3 days before I left for basic military training, because I had the gall to make sure she didn't kill herself when she was completely shit-faced will do it. Story 15, I should probably be using a throwaway for this, but why not? I stopped talking to my mother after she called me up drunk 2 days before my birthday to tell me how much of a failure I was and how I'd end up as big a failure as my dad, who makes more money than her and has a spouse, so that doesn't make much sense. I let go of all of the rage ID held up for 14 years physical and mental abuse when I was a kid. She never knew when to stop drinking, went to rehab, and proceeded to keep drinking, etc., telling her how she was the failure, not me, and that when I have a child, I'll make sure to raise him or better than she raised me. I stopped talking to her, and she tried to regain custody of me 6 months after the incident. She worked for child services. I've learned 80 of the city is corrupt because of this. I proceeded to provide proof to my caseworker, who was later imprisoned for tax evasion, and the FBI is still investigating her to this day of what she had said to me at that time and everything she had said to me up until that point. I never trusted that lady, and am glad she's in prison. Around the time this was all happening, I had gotten into the best private high school in the area, and my stepmother was working for one of the most successful law offices in the state, so she was able to use her influence to free me from the grasp of these crazy people who can't wrap their heads around a woman not being able to be a good parent. I'm graduating from high school next year, and I've been able to lead some of my school's retreats. Religious school takes a lot of pride in their retreats, and I can see why and speak about the entire incident, as well as my experiences that resulted from it. Overall, I wouldn't change the entire experience, and as of right now, I have no intention of speaking to her ever again. Edit, I just remembered that she sent me a Christmas card with some money in it. It had names of things I didn't recognize, which kind of leads me to believe she doesn't think that I've ever left her home, and I know what she's talking about. Story 16, my father is rotting away in a nursing home in Florida. He has no idea who he is. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years, and I rarely think of him. It sounds harsh, but he chose this life. He had 7 kids with my mother and spent every year of their marriage drinking himself into a stupor. When he would sober up enough, he would take jobs as a truck driver. He would leave town, and my mother would be stuck with little kids, no money, no car, no food. I remember her telling me a story about feeding herself and first 3 kids on a bag of potatoes for 2 weeks because there was nothing else to eat. She has also talked of living in a car and tent. He was a horrible man, and he hit a lot. The final straw for her was when he threw a full beer can at her in front of us and beat her so horribly that he broke the bone around her eye socket. She never said so, and I never spoke about it. But I also believe that she was scared that he may start abusing me. Because I was 7 at the time, she finally left him. He took our house, the only one I had ever known, and threw us out on the streets. We lived in a shelter for several months until Mom managed to get us into a rental and start college. 4 years later, she had managed to get a degree to be an English teacher and keep us all on the straight and narrow. By herself, She is my hero. She taught for several years and has now worked at a women's shelter, the very same one that saved us for the last 15 or so years. I continued to try to have a relationship with my father until I was 19 and finally realized it wasn't worth it. The man beat all of us senseless for years, but I blamed it on the alcoholism. He brought home men and women in the middle of the night, and Mom would hide us away upstairs where she thought we wouldn't see. He used all of our money for beer instead of food and clothes. He took away everything that we had. We literally had 3 hours to pack up a lifetime. And that was only because the policeman stood there in the front yard and wouldn't let him in while we packed. When I was 19, I tried to get him to come stay with me so I could help him, and he swore he would show up, and he just didn't. I was done at that point and will never speak to him again. All of the love that I could have given him has gone to my mom. She's the most amazing person on the planet. She has strength that I will never be able to understand, and I will never understand how she managed. She had 5 boys and 2 girls under the age of 16 when she finally left. She spent 5 years trying to divorce this man and dealing with his stalking and death threats. The youngest 2 were twins in diapers. Yet she got up every day and made sure we had clean clothes to wear to school. She made sure we were fed and cared for. She got on the dean's list every semester. She managed to support us on the tiny amount of child support that she got from his disability check each month and her student loans. We are all well-rounded, normal adults, and it is all thanks to her. My husband and I will be married 15 years this year, and it is because she taught us what a marriage should be and what it should not be. Everyone who is reading this and who is in a similar situation, please let this be your example. It is possible to pull yourself up and break the cycle. You can change your life, no matter how bad it is. Being a donor does not make you a parent. You have to deserve your child's love and respect. And she does. I would give her the moon and stars if I could. Mom will turn 62 this year and is still working at that shelter, answering the hotline on the night shift. She talks domestic violence and rape victims through their nightmares. She helps a mother and her small children to run from an abusive boyfriend. She helps someone who was molested as a child to make sense of their life. She drives a 15-year-old van and struggles to make ends meet. She still pays on those college loans and dotes on her grandchildren. I suspect she does it all with a Superman shirt under her sweater, and he rots in a bed on himself. He could have had it all, but he chose the bottle. She chose us, and I thank God every day that she did. Edit wow. Thank you, kind stranger, for my first Reddit gold. Totally didn't expect that. Story 17. After years of physical and mental abuse from my father, the physical part stopped, and I started to realize that the sentiment of blood is thicker than water is a bunch of bullshit and not something that excuses horrible behavior from a parent. The mental and emotional abuse continued every time we talked on the phone or saw each other. Any way he could have tried to manipulate or control my life was attempted and created so much stress and havoc that I just broke and told him he had to stop his behavior or I would have no choice but to stop talking to him. He told me I wouldn't have to put up with his behavior if I didn't do things to warrant it. So I hung up and decided to wash my hands of him for good. Story 18. I lived a carefully balanced double life when I lived with them, and even for a while after I moved out on my own, it was easier to just stop talking to them than it was to maintain a double identity. I've tried a few times to invite them back into my life, but it hasn't worked. I don't fit their idea of the person I should be and am living a life completely opposite of what they think I should. Our conversations always ended up with being lectured on needing to change my path and make right choices, and me trying to get them to understand that even at the close of my 20s, my life is my own, and that I'm actually happy in life. Frustrating and depressing, and all around not good for me. I'm going to make one final attempt to prop the bridge up and open the road again. But if they don't make any effort, I'm going to let that burn. Story 19. When they arrived at my front door, completely unannounced, might seem pretty minor until you consider that I live in the USA and my parents live in the UK. They came all the way over here on a last-minute flight because they assumed the reason I was reluctant to talk to them at the time was because my spouse was stopping me. There's not really any juicy backstory to this. My parents aren't addicts or hoarders. They're not predators or violent drunks. They're just really shitty people. They raised me in such a controlling and manipulative way that they never expected me to be able to live outside their influence. And they've never been able to accept that I'm another person and not just an extension of themselves. They think the reason I don't talk to them anymore is because I like hurting them, not because I couldn't stand their constant chipping away at my self-esteem, drilling into me that love and success meant total obedience and total submission to others, without questioning and without thinking of my own needs. But yeah, the overall reason, I guess, is because it just doesn't occur to them that anything they did was wrong. To them, abuse only ever means broken bones or inappropriate touching, and having them jump me like that in such a way, and at such cost to them that I have no choice but to let them in, was the last straw. Story 20. My parents split when I was 5. I moved states with my mom, but I used to visit my dad over the summer. He put me in summer camp, so I would really only see him after he picked me up, and before he dropped me off, he used to beat the out of me and me up mentally. He was a foster kid that had abusive alcoholic parents, so of course he carried on the tradition. When I was 10, he hit me so hard he broke my nose. I stole his gun and tried to kill him, but I was 10, so I wasn't really sure how to use it. I just didn't know what else to do. My plan failed, and somehow he convinced the family it was all my fault. I was committed for 6 months. I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies. I wasn't bipolar and manic. No one believed my case. My dad was an amazing people person, as well as a con man, and had everyone convinced of his story, even me for a while. I haven't seen him since I was 10. My mom is on her 5th divorce. She owes me thousands of dollars, which I gave up on years ago. She's still on drugs, drinks, smokes, and job hops like no other. She's also a great people person and somehow gets everyone to feel sorry for her. Her negativity is a gaping black hole that will you in. I can't be around her despite living in the same city. I haven't seen her for about 5 years. I have 2 sisters, same mom, that saw things for what they were up until a few years ago. Now the sisters have written me off as the bad sheep, and they continue to see my mother. I never see my nephew or nieces, and that sucks. I was kicked out of my house when I was 14. I was homeless, but managed to hop around from friend to friend for at least a place to stay. When I was 15, I was adopted. Basically, my best friend's mom took me in. It was awesome. More family than my family. I had 2 new brothers, a new sister, and a great mom for years. This lasted for years. For about the past 3 to 4 years, we're in less and less contact. Older brother moved away to Army. Younger brother moved into his own place, got married and had a kid. Younger sister got married and moved to her own place. I kept trying, inviting myself over, inviting them over, having BBQs, etc. Every event became less frequent. The excuses kept growing. Now it's a shocker to get a Facebook message. I don't blame them. I'm not family. The younger brother's wife reminds me of it every time I see her. It makes hard. Story 21. She left when I was 4 and never looked back. She was never interested in being a mom in the first place, and I guess her depression and personal issues got the best of her. She would make excuses not to show up for her weekly visitation with me, and when she would stop by, she spent more time talking to my grandparents than interacting with me. One day, she came by, as usual, left the house saying, "I'll see you guys next week," got in the car where her mother was waiting for her, said she was done with all of this, that my family treats her like a second-class citizen, never wanted to speak of this again, and rode off into the sunset. To be quite honest, after what she did to herself, and subsequently me, am better off without her. As for my father, I see him during family functions, but our relationship is so strained and tumultuous that it wouldn't bother me in the least if I never heard from him again. I know that sounds very harsh, but it's the God's honest truth. Story 22. I was 45 years old. I made my weekly call to my mother, who then proceeded to tell me that she was having back surgery the next day, and none of my siblings were there to help her. This was not unusual, because she had already alienated my 3 siblings. It was a Friday night. So I hung up and booked the first flight I could to her city. It cost me $800 because of the last-minute booking. I take the red-eye Saturday morning and make it to the hospital about 2 hours before she is scheduled to go into surgery. I walk into the hospital room, and the first words out of her mouth are how terrible I look. Again, this is not unusual. My mother never has a nice word to say about anyone. During the week she is in the hospital, I am either there or at her house to help care for my disabled brother, not one of the 3 siblings from above. He got drunk and rolled his car off an embankment, resulting in brain damage 20 years previous to this. The accident that disabled him was his 6th major accident. For the other 5, he started having accidents as soon as he got his license. My mother always made an excuse. The tire blew out. Someone ran him off the road. The steering went out. My brother never drove a used car in his life. My parents got him a new car every other year, or whenever he wrecked the old one. He could have had a life and recovered better from his accident. But my mother chose to keep him at home and helpless because she wanted his Social Security disability money. He was not required or allowed to take care of himself. She made his food, did his laundry, etc. He was kicked out of a health club she signed him up for because he exposed himself to people there. My mother claimed he just had trouble making it to the bathroom on time because of his meds, so he was peeing in a water fountain, not exposing himself. Like that made it okay. The day after my mother's surgery, I took my brother out to lunch. He drank a 32-ounce soda. Since I was aware of his incontinence problems, I asked him if he needed to use the restroom since we were going on a long drive. He said no, During the drive, I offered several times to stop so he could use the bathroom. Still no, FYI, he was not wearing adult diapers. Between the time it took to eat lunch and the drive, it was 4 hours with him not using the restroom. He did use it when we got home. For the week my mother was in the hospital, she continued to berate me about my looks, my husband, etc. I was used to this and just tried to ignore it. The day before I had to leave to go back to work, I made sure my mother got put in rehab, because if they had sent her home, she would have not followed the doctor's instructions. My brother could make himself food, etc. He just chose not to because he knew someone would do it for him. I'm at her house packing and making sure my brother had everything he needed until my mother got home. I arranged to have one of my siblings looking on him standing in the living room, talking to my husband on the phone. My brother gets up from the recliner he lives in, walks 4 feet to the sliding glass door, unzips his pants, and pees on the patio. WTF, I repeat, WT, actually F. I yelled at him to go to the bathroom. He claimed he couldn't make it in time. I asked him why he didn't use the urinal next to his chair, and his response was that our mother let him pee on the patio. So why should I care? I tried talking to my mother about the situation. She again claimed he could not make it to the bathroom, even after I told her about the long drive. I went home. The next time I spoke to her on the phone, I tried talking to her about him again. She responded by attacking my husband, telling me I should leave my husband because he just manipulated me, so I would do what he wanted. My husband is the most patient, kind man I have ever known. Also, I do what I want when I want. My husband is nothing but supportive, even when he doesn't like my choices. That was the last straw. I told her I could no longer stand by and let her all over my life when she had essentially ruined my brother's life by enabling him. That was 12 years ago, and I've never been happier. My sister now takes care of my brother, and she is kind, but no nonsense.